Humanity had always been a species caught in the middle, a fledgling power at the edge of a galaxy dominated by ancient civilizations. The United Earth Federation had forged peace across the planet, uniting nations and advancing technology, but even they knew how fragile their position was. Despite their achievements, humanity had always been a relatively small player in the grand galactic theater. No one could have predicted that the very peace they had fought for would soon come crashing down. The warning came in the form of an anomaly detected deep within the far reaches of the outer rim. A signal, seemingly artificial, that stretched the boundaries of known space. Earth's most advanced observatories and AI systems scanned the data, dismissing it as a natural occurrence. But as weeks passed, it became clear this was something more. A distress signal, not from another human ship, but from an alien civilization. No one had been prepared for what came next. Captain Iris Delacroix sat in the briefing room, her face illuminated by the flickering holographic screens that projected maps and data streams from deep space. She was a soldier who had seen her share of interplanetary conflicts, but nothing like this. The signals, now confirmed to be originating from a system far beyond the galactic edge, were decoded, revealing a terrifying message. The Thrix are coming. The Thrix, a name whispered in hushed tones by other galactic races, a species feared by even the most powerful. They were a relentless, unstoppable force, known for their ability to conquer and annihilate entire star systems. Their ships were titans, and their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. The Thrix did not negotiate. They assimilated. They did not conquer. They obliterated. The message was clear. Earth was next. Delacroix's mind raced as she processed the implications. The Federation had been working to prepare for alien encounters, but nothing had been put in place for something like this. The Thrix had been myths, rumors whispered by species who had survived their attacks. No one truly believed they could reach Earth, until now. The Earth Defense Council scrambled to respond, calling emergency meetings and deploying ships to the outer rim. But it was already too late. As the days passed, strange phenomena began to unfold. A distant star system, one that had been carefully monitored for decades, vanished from the sky. No explosions, no sign of energy discharges, just gone. Entire systems wiped clean. The signal from the Thrix was no longer a distant warning, but an approaching death sentence. Then came the darkness. The first wave of Thrix ships emerged from the blackness of space like a storm, unfathomably massive. Their sleek black hulls gleaming with malicious purpose. Their approach was swift, and Earth's orbital defenses, though advanced, stood no chance against the overwhelming firepower of the Thrix fleet. Ships that had been touted as the greatest humanity had ever built were torn apart with ease. The skies darkened with the looming shadows of the invaders, their vessels blocking out the sun. Delacroix was stationed aboard the Federation flagship Vanguard, watching the reports come in from Earth's surface. The first of Earth's cities had already been reduced to ash. New York, London, Beijing, once proud symbols of human achievement, were now nothing more than glowing craters. Earth's resistance was futile. The Thrix moved with a precision that defied belief, targeting key military installations and infrastructure. Panic spread like wildfire, the planet descending into chaos. "Captain," a voice from behind her broke through the haze of disbelief. It was Lieutenant Anders, her trusted second-in-command, his face pale but resolute. "The Thrix have launched planetary bombardment. Earth's cities are falling faster than we can count." Delacroix's chest tightened. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. We need to make a stand. Now." But she knew. Deep down, she knew that this would be different. The Thrix weren't just another alien threat. They were extinction incarnate. And yet, as Earth's lights dimmed and the world teetered on the edge of annihilation, one undeniable truth rose to the surface. Humanity would not go down without a fight. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything they had ever built. and Captain Delacroix was determined to lead them to victory, even if it meant facing the impossible. The Thrix made their move swiftly, as if Earth's destruction was a mere formality, a stop on their endless march of annihilation. Captain Iris Delacroix watched from the vanguard as the full extent of their invasion began to unfold. The first wave, massive and relentless, tore through Earth's orbital defenses. She saw entire fleets of human warships disintegrate in the blink of an eye, their defenses no match for the sheer brutality of the Thrix assault. The Thrix ships, black as voids in the sky, descended on Earth like vultures closing in on their prey. They moved in perfect synchrony, their enormous battle cruisers unleashing torrents of fire, vaporizing entire cities with pinpoint accuracy. Earth's defenses, the best humanity had ever built, crumbled under the onslaught. She'd been prepared for an attack, but not like this. Not this swift, not this merciless. "Captain, they're moving on our command centers." Lieutenant Anders's voice came through her comms, sharp with urgency. "We're losing ground on every front." Delacroix's stomach twisted. She glanced down at Earth below her home and the bright flashes that lit up the sky. The loss was unimaginable. In mere hours, the Thrix had crippled half of Earth's military infrastructure, cutting off all communications with the outer colonies. As panic spread worldwide, the Federation scrambled to form a defense. But they were too late. Earth had been exposed as weak and vulnerable, far too small and fragile to resist the storm of the Thrix. Delacroix had always been a leader of men, a strategist trained for war, but even she couldn't deny the crushing reality. They were facing an enemy unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Thrix didn't just conquer. They erased civilizations, wiped away everything that stood in their path. On the ground, the situation was no better. Cities were reduced to rubble, human soldiers engaging in pitched battles against impossible odds. Even the elite forces of Earth's military were no match for the Thrix's overwhelming might. Reports of entire battalions being decimated within minutes of engagement filled the communication lines, the grim messages punctuated by static and silence. And then came the unthinkable. A group of insurgent fighters, led by Commander Lyle, an unremarkable ex-soldier with no known record of military distinction, had managed to down a Thrix battleship in one of the most daring, improbable strikes Earth had ever seen. Using nothing but stolen military tech, sheer ingenuity, and a desperate will to survive, Lyle's team had outmaneuvered the Thrix in the city of Denver. They'd used the ruins of the city's skyscrapers as cover, rigging traps and explosives to catch the Thrix off guard. The damage wasn't enough to cripple the invasion, but it sent shockwaves through the invaders. Delacroix watched the video feeds from the ground, disbelief creeping into her mind. Could this be true? Could humanity fight back against a force so much stronger than them? The success was short-lived, however. The Thrix responded quickly, a retaliation strike that was swift and devastating. The Thrix, it seemed, had a ruthless understanding of how to stamp out rebellion before it could take root. Denver was leveled in a single strike, and Commander Lyle's group was decimated. But the message had been clear. Humanity was not without its teeth. It was a fragile, fleeting victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The Federation scrambled to adapt. Earth's leadership, for all their previous strategic miscalculations, finally began to move with a sense of urgency. The planet's remaining forces were mustered into a unified front, and Delacroix was called upon to lead a resistance force aimed at holding what little was left of Earth's defenses. "We won't make it if we keep defending," Delacroix said to her team in a private briefing. "We need to go on the offensive. We have one chance to strike back, and we can't waste it." She could see the hesitation in their eyes, the uncertainty that haunted their every step. The Thrix were ruthless, calculating, and more powerful than they'd ever imagined. Yet the glint of defiance, however small, remained in the eyes of those around her. Humanity's strength wasn't in its technology, nor its armies. It was in its will to survive. With no other options, Delacroix and her team began planning a high-risk mission to infiltrate a Thrix command vessel and gather vital intelligence. The odds were astronomical, but the alternative was worse. If humanity had any hope of survival, they had to learn the Thrix's weaknesses, and Delacroix was determined to find them, even if it meant flying directly into the heart of the storm. The first strike had been devastating, but the real battle was just beginning. The question now was whether humanity had the strength to see it through. The aftermath of the Thrix's first assault left Earth in a state of fractured chaos, but something extraordinary was beginning to take shape amidst the ashes. Despite the overwhelming odds and the seemingly unstoppable force of the Thrix, a flicker of defiance spread like wildfire. Humanity was starting to rally. From every corner of the planet, resistance movements began to emerge, small, scattered at first, but unified by a singular purpose: survival. Captain Iris Delacroix stood before the hastily assembled leadership of Earth's Federation in a small, dimly lit command center deep beneath the ground. Above them, Earth's skies were still thick with smoke, the dark remnants of the Thrix assault hanging like a pall over the entire planet. But there was a quiet energy in the room, a collective resolve that hadn't been there before. They were no longer waiting for the inevitable end. They were planning a way to strike back. "We can't afford to wait any longer," Delacroix said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We've seen what the Thrix are capable of, but now we need to show them what humanity is capable of. Every inch of ground we lose means 1,000 more dead. We need to unite. Now." Her words weren't just a rallying cry. They were a demand. A demand for action, for unity, for survival. The Federation's leaders exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the Thrix they feared. It was the chaos of this new world. Nations were divided, resources were scarce, and many felt they had already lost too much to keep fighting. But Delacroix's presence in the room was a spark that couldn't be ignored. She had witnessed the horrors firsthand. She had survived the devastation. And if she believed they could still win, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope. A small defiant voice rose from the back of the room. Commander Lyle, the rogue leader who had masterminded the daring attack in Denver, stepped forward. "She's right. The Thrix think we're weak. They think we're scattered. Let's prove them wrong." There was a murmur of agreement. Lyle, despite his lack of formal rank, had earned the respect of those present. His team's success had sent a message to the Thrix, but more importantly, it had ignited something in humanity, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, resistance was possible. Delacroix's voice grew stronger. "This is the moment. We have the intelligence from that strike. We know they have weaknesses, and we're not alone in this fight. The people of Earth are ready. We can't afford to waste this chance." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Then, one by one, Earth's leaders began to nod. Governments long divided by politics, history, and fear had one common enemy now. The survival of humanity depended on them coming together. The Federation was born anew, a coalition of resistance forces, each with a different purpose but united under one banner: Earth. In the following days, the Federation's forces began to consolidate. Resistance cells from across the globe, hastily trained soldiers, civilians, engineers, scientists, and even former enemies, joined together, pooling their resources and knowledge. Delacroix's team, now bolstered by reinforcements, set out on multiple missions to gather crucial information about the Thrix. Earth's engineers worked around the clock to develop new weapons and tactics, each one crafted with a single aim: to turn the tide of the war. Then came the breakthrough that would change everything. Dr. Ava Lynn, an eccentric and brilliant scientist who had been leading a team of researchers in the aftermath of the invasion, discovered something humanity had overlooked. While the Thrix's technology was vastly superior to theirs, it operated on an energy signature that had a distinct flaw. The Thrix's ships and weapons systems were vulnerable to an energy pulse, a rare phenomenon that, when triggered, could destabilize their shields and render their weapons useless. It was the kind of discovery that could shift the balance of power, but it was also incredibly risky. No one knew exactly how to generate such a pulse, let alone use it in a real-world battle. Still, the discovery was a ray of light in the darkest of times. Delacroix knew that they couldn't waste a moment. If they were going to survive, they needed to act fast, to strike while the Thrix were still unaware of Earth's newfound resilience. She gathered her top commanders, including Lyle and Dr. Lin, and formulated a plan. They would infiltrate a Thrix command vessel, steal the necessary technology to trigger the pulse, and return before the invaders realized what was happening. It was an almost suicidal mission, but it was their only chance. And so, with humanity's future hanging in the balance, the Resistance launched into action. The Federation, once a fractured collection of nations and ideals, had become something greater. A united front that was willing to fight, not just for survival, but for the chance to reclaim their world. The rallying call had been answered. Now, it was time to make the first real strike. But as Delacroix looked out over the horizon, she knew the fight was far from over. The hardest battles were yet to come. The Federation had united, its people rising from the ruins of Earth's shattered cities, but the Thrix were no ordinary invaders. They were predators, honed through eons of conquest, their ships vast and impenetrable. Now, humanity had something to fight for, a hope, no matter how slim. But the price of that hope was high. Captain Iris Delacroix knew they were venturing into the very heart of the storm, and the chances of success were slim at best. The mission was simple on paper: infiltrate a Thrix command vessel, steal the technology to trigger the energy pulse, and return to Earth before the invaders could react. In practice, it was a suicide run, and every member of the team knew it. Yet, there was no other choice. This was humanity's chance to strike back. The Vanguard was one of Earth's most powerful warships, a relic of a time when humanity had dared to dream of defending itself in deep space. Now, it was little more than a symbol of Earth's remaining strength. Captain Delacroix stood on the bridge, staring out into the void, the shadows of the Thrix fleet looming in the distance. "Captain, we're nearing the Thrix flagship," Lieutenant Anders reported, his voice tight with tension. "We'll be within their detection range in less than 10 minutes." Delacroix nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. She glanced around at the faces of her team. Lyle, Dr. Lin, and the rest of the crew. All of them were preparing for what could very well be their last mission. The air was thick with apprehension, but there was something else too, a silent resolve that kept them moving forward, step by step, toward their grim objective. "Prepare the shuttle," she ordered. "We're going in." The shuttle, a sleek and heavily modified ship capable of stealth travel, would carry Delacroix and her team to the Thrix command vessel. The plan was simple: slip past the outer defenses, infiltrate the ship undetected, and locate the pulse technology. Once they had it, they would send a signal to the Federation, and Earth's forces would launch a counterattack. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. As the shuttle launched from the Vanguard, Delacroix couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The Thrix flagship loomed like a monolithic shadow, its dark hull reflecting the light of distant stars. It was as if the very ship was a living, breathing entity, a symbol of destruction that would wipe out everything in its path. The team moved with precision, every second counting as they navigated through the void. The shuttle's cloaking systems hummed quietly, keeping them hidden from the Thrix sensors. Every movement felt like it could be their last. One wrong turn, one mistake, and they would be exposed, their mission compromised before it even began. As they neared the flagship, Dr. Lin's voice crackled over the comms. "I've located the pulse technology," she said. "It's deep within the command center. We'll need to bypass their security systems to get to it." Delacroix nodded, her mind already racing through the possible scenarios. "We don't have much time. Prepare for a quick extraction." They touched down on the Thrix flagship with minimal noise, the shuttle's thrusters powering down just in time to prevent detection. The air inside the ship was cold, sterile, and heavy with an unnatural silence. The team moved swiftly, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning every corner of the dark corridors. The Thrix had built their ships to be both labyrinthine and oppressive, and the deeper they went, the more they could feel the oppressive weight of the alien presence. The ship seemed alive, its corridors pulsing with an eerie rhythmic energy. As they approached the command center, they encountered the first real obstacle: a Thrix patrol, 2 heavily armed soldiers, their hulking forms a terrifying sight, even in the dim light of the ship, blocked their path. "Take them out quietly," Delacroix whispered, her voice barely audible. With practiced precision, Lyle and his team sprang into action. The fight was swift, brutal, and silent. Within moments, the Thrix soldiers lay motionless on the floor, their weapons discarded and forgotten. Delacroix motioned for the team to move on, her heart pounding. They couldn't afford to linger. They reached the command center, the door sliding open with a soft hiss. Inside, the pulse technology lay within a secure chamber, guarded by more advanced security systems than anything humanity had ever built. The walls were covered in strange alien symbols, and the center of the room was dominated by a massive, pulsating core of energy. Dr. Lin stepped forward, her fingers flying over the interface as she hacked into the system. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity. Delacroix stood watch, her senses on high alert. They were running out of time. "Almost there," Dr. Lin muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. Just a few more seconds. The air around them seemed to thrum with the Thrix's energy. Delacroix felt it deep in her bones. Something was wrong. The flagship had sensed their intrusion. The countdown had begun. Before she could react, alarms blared across the ship, a shrill sound that made her heart skip a beat. The Thrix were coming. The mission was about to turn into a fight for their lives, and they hadn't even reached the hardest part yet. The alarms blared across the Thrix flagship, sending a jolt of panic through Delacroix's team. The rhythmic pulse of the ship seemed to grow louder, a deafening drumbeat that matched the pounding of her own heart. She shot a glance at Dr. Lin, whose fingers flew across the interface, desperately trying to complete the hack and access the pulse technology. Sweat dripped down her face, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Get it done, Dr. Lin," Delacroix commanded, her voice strained with urgency. "We don't have much time." The Thrix were closing in, and with every passing second, the risk of being discovered grew. The corridors outside the command center were already swarming with alien soldiers, their heavy footsteps reverberating through the walls. They were coming for them. Lyle stepped forward, positioning himself at the door with a grim expression on his face. "I'll hold them off," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You finish what you started." Delacroix nodded, grateful for his courage, though her stomach churned with the knowledge of what they were facing. Lyle was good, better than most, but even he wouldn't be able to stop a full Thrix assault. The odds were against them. "Focus, Dr. Lin," she urged, turning her attention back to the scientist. The pulse technology was just within reach, but every minute spent was a minute closer to their doom. "I'm trying." Lin snapped, the strain evident in her voice. Her eyes flickered across the screen, and then her face brightened. "Got it. I've accessed the core data. We can trigger the pulse from here, but we need to." "Oh no." "What's wrong?" Delacroix demanded. Dr. Lin's fingers hovered over the interface, frozen. "The Thrix have activated a fail-safe. The moment we trigger the pulse, they'll lock down the entire ship. Everything will go into lockdown. It'll trap us inside." Delacroix's mind raced. A dead end. The pulse was their only hope, but they couldn't afford to be trapped on the ship, not with the Thrix closing in. They had to find a way to finish the mission and escape, no matter what. "Is there a way to bypass the fail-safe?" Delacroix asked, her voice hard. "I can try, but it'll take time, and I'll be exposed," Dr. Lin said, her voice heavy with doubt. Before Delacroix could answer, the door to the command center slammed open with a metallic screech. A squad of Thrix soldiers poured in, their towering forms filling the doorway, armed with weapons that crackled with deadly energy. Delacroix's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. They were in this together now, and they weren't about to back down. "Prepare to fight," Delacroix shouted, drawing her blaster from its holster and taking a firing stance. "Lyle, hold them off." Lyle didn't need to be told twice. He fired first, sending a volley of blasts into the approaching soldiers. The shots hit with pinpoint accuracy, but the Thrix soldiers' shields absorbed most of the damage. They were fast, too fast, and their weapons were devastating. Delacroix could already see one of her men fall, a scream cut short by a well-aimed shot. "Dr. Lin, hurry," Delacroix shouted, her eyes darting back to the scientist, who was frantically working to disable the failsafe. "I'm working as fast as I can." Lin yelled back, her fingers trembling over the console. Delacroix's mind raced as the Thrix pressed forward. She fired again, her shot sending another Thrix soldier to the ground. But they didn't stop. The aliens were relentless, advancing despite the casualties. Her breath quickened as more soldiers poured in from the corridor, filling the room with the smell of sulfur and ozone. They couldn't hold them off for much longer. "Lyle, fall back," Delacroix ordered. There was no time for a prolonged fight. They had to finish the mission or die trying. She grabbed the communicator from her belt and activated it. "Vanguard, this is Captain Delacroix. We need immediate evac." Now, static crackled over the comms, but there was no response. The Thrix had likely jammed the signals. They were isolated, trapped in a fight they couldn't win unless they completed their mission. The pulse technology was the key. If they could trigger it, they could disrupt the Thrix's shields, giving Earth's forces a chance to strike back. But the price might be their lives. With a final, desperate push, Dr. Lin shouted, "I've bypassed the fail-safe. We're ready to fire the pulse." Delacroix's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. Do it now. Dr. Lin slammed her palm down on the activation button. The entire ship trembled as the energy pulse was released, the power humming through the walls and floors. The Thrix soldiers froze for a split second as their shields flickered and collapsed. The air felt electric with the sudden change in energy. But it wasn't enough to stop the oncoming assault. "Go, go, go," Delacroix shouted, grabbing Dr. Lin by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. "We've got to get out of here, now." But even as they ran, the ship seemed to come alive with the Thrix's fury. The escape was far from guaranteed. Their mission had been a success, but now survival was the only thing on their minds. And the hardest part was still to come. The walls of the Thrix flagship shuddered with a deep, guttural thrum as the energy pulse rippled through the ship's systems. For a fleeting moment, Delacroix allowed herself to believe they had actually done it, that they had struck a blow against the Thrix. But there was no time to savor the victory. The mission was far from over. The Thrix were not known for mercy, and the team was now in their crosshairs. "Move," Delacroix barked, pulling Dr. Lin along as they sprinted down the dimly lit alien corridors. The oppressive silence of the ship had given way to a cacophony of alarms and flashing red lights. The Thrix were not just going to stand idly by and let them escape. Lyle was ahead of them, already covering the rear. He fired his blaster in quick bursts, taking down a few of the advancing soldiers, but Delacroix knew it wouldn't be enough to slow the flood of reinforcements. They were running on borrowed time. "They're everywhere," Lyle yelled, his voice strained as he reloaded. "We need to get to the docking bay, now." Delacroix nodded, her heart pounding. The docking bay was their only chance for escape. The Vanguard was waiting, just beyond the Thrix's detection range, but it was a long shot. They had no guarantee the ship would be able to extract them, especially with the Thrix scrambling to retaliate. And even if they reached the bay, there was no guarantee they'd make it past the ship's internal defenses. As they turned a corner, they ran straight into a wall of Thrick's soldiers. Their hulking forms were too large to ignore, blocking the passage ahead. Without missing a beat, Delacroix dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired. Her shot took out one of the Thricks, but it only slowed the others. They were too well-armored, too strong. "Cover me," Delacroix ordered, as she raised her blaster to engage again. Lyle and the others followed suit, opening fire. The Thrick's soldiers returned fire with their own energy weapons, the blasts sizzling through the air as the team dodged and moved quickly. A stray shot clipped Lyle's shoulder, sending him stumbling. He gritted his teeth and pressed forward, but the wound slowed him. "We need to get him out of here," Dr. Lin cried out, her voice trembling. Delacroix's mind raced. They were close, so close to the docking bay. They couldn't afford to lose anyone now. "Lyle, keep moving," she shouted, her voice carrying an urgency that he couldn't ignore. With sheer determination, Lyle pushed forward despite the pain. They ran, weaving through fire and debris, closer to the docking bay with every second. Their boots echoed on the metal floor, the sound of their footsteps the only thing louder than the Thricks' shouts and gunfire. Almost there, Delacroix called out as they neared the large, sealed doors of the docking bay. But just as hope began to flicker in her chest, the lights above them flickered, and the doors slammed shut with an ominous hiss. "No," Delacroix shouted, her pulse quickening. What the hell happened? The lights above flickered again, and then the voice of a Thrick's commander crackled over the ship's intercom. "You thought you could escape, human." It snarled, its tone cold and mocking. "You are trapped. No one leaves this ship alive." Delacroix gritted her teeth, her mind racing. The Thricks had anticipated their move, and now they were locked in. The door wouldn't open unless she found a way to override the security systems, and there was no time to waste. "I'm going to hack it," Dr. Lin said, her voice strained but resolute. "Give me a few seconds." "Do it fast," Delacroix said, covering her as best as she could. The Thricks were closing in, and each second felt like a lifetime. Dr. Lin moved quickly, her fingers flying over the panel as she bypassed the security lock. But just as she was about to complete the hack, the sound of thundering footsteps filled the corridor. More Thrick soldiers, too many for them to handle. "We don't have much time," Delacroix shouted, turning to face the oncoming wave. "Lyle, Anders, get ready. We're making a stand here." The team braced themselves, their weapons drawn, as the Thrick soldiers appeared around the corner. Delacroix's breath came in ragged gasps as the first of the alien soldiers rounded the bend. A violent firefight erupted in an instant. Energy blasts cracked through the air, the walls around them shaking with every hit. Delacroix's every instinct told her to fight, to survive, but the odds seemed insurmountable. Dr. Lin was still hacking, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around her. The doors remained sealed, but every second she gained was one more chance for them to escape. A Thrick soldier charged at Lyle, its massive weapon raised. Lyle fought back, a blur of motion as he ducked and dodged, his blaster tearing into the alien's armor. But there was too much fire coming from all directions. Lyle was running out of time. "Dr. Lin," Delacroix shouted, barely able to hear herself over the din of battle. "Hurry up." Just as the Thricks closed in on them, a loud crack rang through the air, and the door to the docking bay slid open with a hiss. The Vanguard was there, its massive silhouette a beacon of salvation. But the real battle was just beginning. The team was split between escape and fight, each second pushing them closer to the brink. Would they make it to safety in time? Or would the Thricks close in for the final blow? The doors to the docking bay slid open with a hiss, but the sight that greeted them was not the sanctuary they had hoped for. The Vanguard's sleek hull loomed in the distance, its docking ramps lowered, but a wall of Thrick soldiers had already filled the bay, blocking their path. The Thrick's commander, a towering figure with jagged armor and a cruel grin, stood at the forefront of the attack, his eyes glinting with malice. Delacroix's heart hammered in her chest as she saw the sheer number of Thrick's soldiers, dozens, at least, lining up with their weapons aimed directly at them. The team was trapped. They had no choice but to fight through the alien onslaught or die trying. "Move, now," Delacroix shouted, her voice like a whip. The team darted forward, weapons blazing. The corridors of the docking bay became a war zone, energy blasts lighting up the air as the Thrick soldiers returned fire with deadly precision. Delacroix's blaster was an extension of her arm, each shot hitting its mark. But the Thricks were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Lyle fired first, his shots taking down 2 soldiers at once, but his movements slowed as pain shot through his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the agony as he continued to fight. But the toll was evident. His shots were less accurate, his reaction times dulled by the injury. Delacroix glanced back at Dr. Lin, who was struggling to keep up with the chaos. "Keep moving, Lin," she shouted, urging her to press forward. The scientist was fumbling with her blaster, trying to reload, but the weight of the moment was clear. She was shaken. "Come on, we don't have time." Delacroix's urge, her own weapon smoking as another Thrick soldier fell to the ground. The team was now in full retreat, each member falling back to the ramp that led to the shuttle. But the Thrick's commander was not about to let them escape. He signaled to his troops, and the soldiers formed a perimeter around the team, closing in from every angle. They were surrounded. "End of the line, humans," the Thrick's commander said, his voice a low growl. "You will not leave this ship alive." Delacroix's mind raced as she quickly assessed the situation. They were trapped, with no way out. The Vanguard was still a distance away, and with the Thricks commanding the docking bay, they would never make it to the shuttle in time. She couldn't afford to let them be captured. "Lyle, take out the leader," Delacroix ordered, her voice steady, despite the rising panic in her chest. "The rest of us will cover you." Lyle nodded, his face pale but determined. He gripped his blaster with both hands and aimed for the Thrick's commander, a bead of sweat running down his forehead as he steadied his aim. The commander saw him, and a wicked smile crossed his face. "Foolish," the commander taunted, raising his own weapon. But before the commander could fire, Lyle squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, hitting the commander square in the chest. The Thrick's leader staggered back, but his armor absorbed most of the blast. Still, it gave them a brief opening. "Go now," Delacroix shouted. The team broke into a sprint, running toward the shuttle as fast as they could. The ramp was still too far away, and Thrick's soldiers closed in from every side. Delacroix kept firing, her shots precise, but every time she took down one enemy, another seemed to take its place. Dr. Lin stumbled, her feet catching on the slick floor as she lost her balance. Delacroix grabbed her arm, pulling her up and urging her forward. "Keep moving, Dr. Lin. We can't stop." The Thricks were almost upon them, the last few meters stretching out like an eternity. The sound of gunfire filled the air, and the screech of the Thricks' weapons was deafening. Lyle, still covering the rear despite his injury, fired relentlessly, but his movements were slower. He was running on pure adrenaline now. "Almost there," Lyle grunted, his voice strained. Then, just as the team reached the shuttle's ramp, a deafening explosion tore through the docking bay. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, knocking Delacroix and the others off their feet. She hit the ground hard, the world spinning as debris rained down from above. "Get up," Lyle shouted, scrambling to his feet. "We're almost out." Delacroix pushed herself up, her body aching from the fall, but she didn't hesitate. They were so close to the shuttle. The Thrick soldiers were momentarily stunned by the blast, but it wouldn't last for long. The team had to move faster. With a final burst of strength, Delacroix sprinted toward the shuttle's ramp, pulling Dr. Lin behind her. Lyle followed, his breathing ragged as he forced himself to keep up. But just as they reached the ramp, A Thrix soldier, larger, stronger than the rest, lunged forward, his weapon raised. "No," Delacroix shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. Lyle turned, just in time to catch the soldier's arm with a well-placed shot, sending the alien crashing to the ground. The ramp began to rise, the door closing behind them with a soft hiss. "We're in," Delacroix panted, her voice raw with relief. "Go, go, go." The shuttle's engines roared to life, and with a surge of power, they blasted off from the Thrix flagship. The hull of the ship grew smaller as they soared into the void, narrowly escaping the clutches of the alien fleet. Delacroix leaned back in her seat, her body trembling with exhaustion. The mission was a success, but the war was far from over. The Vanguard shot through the inky blackness of space, its engines roaring as it sped away from the wreckage of the Thrix flagship. The stars outside the viewing windows seemed to stretch and blur as the ship's speed increased, leaving the dying warship far behind. But despite their narrow escape, the crew was not celebrating. The weight of their ordeal, of the lives lost, and the battles still to come, hung heavy in the air. Delacroix sat in the command chair, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead, her thoughts a jumbled mess of relief and sorrow. The war against the Thrix was far from over. The pulse weapon they had activated had caused chaos in the enemy fleet, yes, but it had also unleashed something else, a chain reaction that would take time to fully understand. It had been their only option, but now the consequences of that decision were beginning to sink in. "Status report," she said, her voice quiet but authoritative. Dr. Lin was at the console, her face pale from exhaustion. "We're safe for now. The Thrix flagship is disabled, but their remaining forces will likely be more cautious. They'll be regrouping. We don't have much time before they come after us." Lyle stood nearby, clutching his injured shoulder, his face pale but resolute. "The Thrix won't stop. We've dealt them a blow, but they won't let us go without a fight. They'll adapt, and they'll come back stronger." Delacroix nodded, her mind already working through the next phase of the plan. "We need to regroup, refuel, and then strike back. If we give them time to recover, we'll lose the momentum. We need to find out what happened with the pulse tech and how we can use it to our advantage." But as she spoke, a wave of fatigue washed over her. She had led her team through hell and back, but the toll it had taken was undeniable. She could feel the weight of their losses, the sacrifices they'd made. Their mission had succeeded, but at what cost? She turned her gaze to Lyle, who was leaning against the bulkhead, still trying to catch his breath. "You good?" she asked. He gave her a small, strained smile. "I've been better, but I'll survive. I always do." Delacroix knew better than to push. Lyle was tough, one of the toughest soldiers she'd ever met. But even he had limits. She turned to Dr. Lin. "How's the pulse tech?" Dr. Lin's fingers danced across the console as she accessed the data from the Thrix flagship. "It's more complex than we realized. The pulse caused a massive disruption, but it also triggered a series of fail-safes in the Thrix network. We'll need time to decode the full potential of the weapon, but what we have now is enough to cripple their fleet if we use it strategically." Delacroix's mind raced. This was their ticket to turning the tide of the war, but it also meant more risk, more sacrifice. "How long?" Dr. Lin hesitated, biting her lip. "A few days, maybe more. It's a lot of data to sift through. But if we're going to use it, we need to be ready when the Thrix strike back." Lyle stepped forward, his eyes burning with determination despite the pain in his shoulder. "We'll be ready. We always are." Delacroix glanced at him, then at Dr. Lin. Her team was battered, bruised, and broken in more ways than one, but they were still standing. They had made it through the worst the Thrix could throw at them, and they would make it through the war. Together. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice steady. "This is just the beginning. We've got a lot of work to do." The bridge was quiet for a moment as the weight of her words settled over the team. The stars outside the viewport seemed distant and cold, but inside the Vanguard, there was still a flicker of hope. The pulse of humanity, the very thing the Thrix had underestimated, still burned bright. They had taken the fight to the Thrix, and they had survived. They had defied the odds. And now, they were going to take it all the way to the end. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Delacroix felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. And it was a force more dangerous than any weapon the Thrix could wield. "We'll make them pay for every inch they've taken," she said quietly, her gaze locking on the stars ahead. "And we'll show them what it means to face humanity at its darkest hour." The crew nodded in silent agreement. Their resolve was unshakable. And with that, they set their course for the next battle. The war was far from over, but humanity had shown the Thrix that it would not bow down. Not now. Not ever.